Hello and welcome back to the channel. As always, I'm your host, Morgan. Please excuse any wind interference in this video as we're experiencing quite the breezy day here in Southern California. So on to the topic. Back in November 2020, the Trump administration removed gray wolves, Canis lupus, from the federal list of endangered and threatened species, which means that they no longer have protection of the Endangered Species Act as of January 4th, 2021. In my previous videos on the subject, we have explored the history of wolf conservation in the contiguous United States, as well as what is currently going on since their delisting back in November. Well, today we have some updates specifically coming from the states of Wisconsin, Montana, and Colorado that we need to discuss if there's any interest in continuing to preserve the conservation efforts of this important keystone species. So please go ahead and grab your snowflake drink of choice and let's get into this. Before we jump into the main body of this topic today, if you want more updates on the wolf conservation situation, please remember to hit subscribe down below. And if you find any value in this video or want to share your thoughts, go ahead and hit that like button and leave me a comment. And if you do hit that subscribe button, you will also be made aware of any of my other videos that usually are going to be along this whole environmental protection, conservation, science, and outdoorsy subjects as well. So without further ado, let's begin with the Colorado update, also known as the good news in today's discussion. So a quick recap of what happened in Colorado. So back on election day, Coloradans voted to pass Proposition 114, which requires the reintroduction of gray wolves to the western slope of the Continental Divide. And these efforts to reintroduce them must be underway by December 31st, 2023. The goal is to restore wolf habitat between the Canadian and Mexican borders and reconnect isolated wolf populations along that Continental Divide and within the Rockies. And this particular proposition is opposed by both agricultural and hunting groups, with the claims that the reintroduction of wolves will decimate livestock populations as well as greatly reduce the populations of game species like elk and other deers. We will actually touch on both of those later in the video, so we're not going to refute those claims right now. But here's the update. Colorado is already moving to make this happen. Dan Gibbs, the executive director of the Colorado Department of Natural Resources, is already on record saying that they wish to already begin identifying donor populations of wolves this spring and summer. And then he hopes to get paws on the ground by 2022 or early 2023. So the goal is to be ahead of that schedule laid out in the proposition that was passed. So that's pretty good news that this is already underway. And hopefully in a few months here, we'll be seeing information about populations that they have pinpointed that would be good populations to pull individual wolves from to start re-establishing wolf populations on that western slope of the Continental Divide in Colorado. Now that we've talked about the good news coming out of Colorado and the fact that they're moving forward with that reintroduction of gray wolves in the Colorado Rockies west of the Continental Divide, we need to discuss what's going on in Wisconsin. So in my previous videos, we've already touched on the fact that Wisconsin has a law on the books that requires an open season on wolf hunting. Now, before gray wolves were delisted from that federal endangered species list, this law to require wolf hunting was essentially not a big deal because wolves were protected. Well, now that wolves have been delisted and that has officially gone into effect as of this month, the Republicans in Wisconsin are pushing the Department of Natural Resources to implement that wolf hunt immediately as opposed to waiting until the fall. This wolf hunting season from my understanding, would normally run from November to February, but they're also calling for an extension on the hunting season if this year's or this season's quotas are not met by the end of this February. They're claiming that hunting is necessary because there are too many wolves and they're destroying livestock in rural communities. So, first of all, the current population of wolves in Wisconsin is estimated to be about 1,000 individuals across the state. And in my first wolf video, we actually discussed a study that found wolves prefer wild game, even when livestock is more abundant. Now, more work does need to be done on this study, and it does need to be expanded upon, but it does open this very interesting line of research that can happen, but based on the data collected in wolf populations around the world in that particular study, even if livestock is more abundant than wild prey, wolves are going to prefer that wild prey. And we will discuss later in this video a case study that actually tracks human-wolf coexistence with non-lethal methods. So let's put a pin on that claim for now. Basically, the thing here is that this wolf hunt masquerades as management, but I have yet to find any actual data that the state of Wisconsin is using to back up their claims that wolves are overpopulated and just destroying livestock. The rhetoric actually surrounding this law suggests that the decimation of wolf populations in the state is preferable to allowing wolves to continue to exist in these ecosystems. So I'm highly suspect as to what the actual motivation to push for this wolf hunt to happen immediately is. The article that talks about this touches on the fact that they're pushing because there's already legislation out to petition the federal government to relist wolves on that federal endangered species list. So it does seem like that it is probably likely that wolves will regain their endangered status in the contiguous United States, and the state of Wisconsin is trying to get as much hunting in as they can before they're delisted again, because they have run a couple of open seasons on wolf hunting in the past when wolves did come off the list previously, but then were relisted a couple years later. So in my opinion, again, that's not a fact, that's just my opinion right now. It seems like Wisconsin's just trying to get as many wolves killed before they go back up on the list again. Okay, so let's move on to the proverbial storm that's actually brewing in Montana. Now that we've discussed Colorado, we've discussed what's going on in Wisconsin, which is honestly not surprising considering the fact that that law was already on the books. Let's move on to Montana. So in Montana, we have Senator Bob Brown and Representative Paul Fielder that have both drafted legislation that would fundamentally shift the way wolves are managed by the state of Montana. And in case it's important, both of these men are Republicans, so they are right-leaning. They are on the side that was in favor of delisting gray wolves to begin with. So the legislation being up for consideration, now it's not one piece of legislation, it's multiple pieces of legislation. Keep that in mind. But these pieces of legislation include things like including wolf licenses with other big game licenses. Now, wolf hunting has been allowed, but you needed a particular license for wolf hunting, if my understanding is correct. I'm not a hunter, so I'm not exactly familiar with hunting licenses, but that's one of the big points that this legislation would possibly do, or at least one of the pieces of legislation could do. Include that wolf hunting license with other big game licenses, or even just reduce the price of a wolf hunting license. It would extend the trapping season. possibly classify them as predators in a similar classification to coyotes, meaning that they could be hunted year-round without a license. Legalize the use of snares as a trapping technique, whereas right now the only legal trapping technique, from my understanding, is the use of the leg traps, which in and of itself is its own issue. And allowing private reimbursement to people who do successfully harvest wolves. And this has been noted by the conservation groups that are outraged by these pieces of legislation as essentially allowing bounties to be put on wolves. Now, of course, Senator Brown has come out and said, oh, it's not a bounty on wolves. It'd be such a small amount of money. You could hardly call it a bounty and no one would get rich off of it. It's a fucking bounty. Call a thing by what it is and own it. And the justification for these proposed pieces of legislation is that wolves are overpopulated and they're decimating elk and deer populations, and of course livestock predation as well. I found this one quote from Senator Brown rather compelling, and then I kind of want to address it right now. So Senator Brown said, basically every drainage you go into, you find wolves, and the packs just keep expanding. With elk and deer numbers, you're not seeing them up in the hills. You might see quite a few, but they're pushed down out of the hills onto private land. Okay. So first of all, the current wolf population in Montana is estimated to be between 850 and 900 individuals. Now, 850 is the most recent number that is cited in the article that is discussing this proposed legislation, and all of that is linked down below. The 900 number is cited in an article about the 2017 Montana Gray Wolf Program Annual Report, which I need to note here that the government website that is supposed to make that report available to the public does not have that report available anymore. And most of the things that you click on, if it's about this wolf program, it just says that the page does not exist. So I can't actually check the Gray Wolf Program Annual Report right now. I tried looking through some scholarly databases, but as of right now, I can't get any official numbers on the Montana wolf population. And it's through that kind of Montana, I think it's Fish and Game or their natural resource website. I forget exactly which one it's called. They're evidently redoing that website, so a lot of pages are down right now, which is interesting, especially when we're looking at legislation that they're trying to push as fast as possible that directly has to do with natural resource management and wildlife management as well. But I digress. So to address the deer thing, that he seems confused that they're not hanging out in one area anymore, let's talk a little bit about predator-prey interactions. So this is also directly addressing the claim of the decimation of deer populations. So the reason we don't see elk and deer stagnant on the hills anymore, like Senator Brown is so upset about, is because when predators like wolves are present, they have this natural predator-prey interaction cycle that will cause the prey species to move. Now, while he might be upset that he can't just look at the hill any time of day he wants and see a massive herd of elk on it, this is actually a good thing, because when you have these prey species staying in one place too long, it will overtax the primary producers, so those plants in the area, and cascade through the ecosystem, causing detrimental effects at every trophic level. So to put that into some smaller words, without the wolves, the deer stay in one spot too long and kill part of the ecosystem. The wolves make them move naturally, and that moving down off the hills into private property thing, grow the F up. The deer populations were there before you guys were. You're literally living in their territory. They're gonna naturally move through. And yeah, if you have a healthy ecosystem, wolf packs are gonna grow in number and you're gonna see more individuals. However, based on the research and the data I've looked at, these populations have been stagnated for a little while now, and you're whining for nothing. So, second of all, wolves are not ravenous monsters that are just gonna kill until entire populations of deer and elk are exterminated. Like, you didn't necessarily say in your quote, but it seems like you're trying to imply. And I do apologize if I'm putting words into anyone's mouth, but wolves generally aren't going to kill more than they need to survive. Sure, put an asterisk by that, and there might be exceptions. Life is messy. There's exceptions to pretty much every rule. But what wolves do when they do hunt and they do kill is they're going to tend to pick off those less fit individuals in a herd of deer or elk. And the overall result is going to be healthier populations of those prey species. That's how those interactions are supposed to work. And actually, if we look at this chart here, so we're looking at deer and density in like wolf range from 2018 to 2019. And this is from the 2020 Minnesota wolf population update. I know this is from Minnesota, not Montana, but like I said, all of Montana's like wolf stuff is currently down. So I don't have access to Montana's data, but this is still going to illustrate my point. If we notice that top line is the deer population, and that bottom line is that wolf population in abundance. So what we're seeing here in that spring of 2018 to the spring of 2019, we're seeing pretty fucking stable deer populations, as well as the wolf population being stable. And that's what we would expect to see, because anyone that understands these species interactions between predator and prey species, we understand that predator and prey species undergo this natural oscillation from these times of great growth in populations and times of massive fall-offs, or massive great. It's subjective depending on what species interactions you're looking at. But you'll see a natural oscillation if you're mapping the actual population sizes next to each other. But the big point is, when the two populations are stable, they're going to be stable. And you're going to get that stabilization. Yes, you will have some years where deer and elk populations are going to decline, but that is natural whether or not wolves are there. And actually, it's problematic if the wolves are not there, because you're not going to get that natural oscillation downwards. What you'll also see if you look at both populations on one graph, the wolf population is going to oscillate at about the same rate just behind the deer and elk population, hitting their maximum just after the deer population hit their maximum, and then declining down and hitting their minimum just after the deer population hit their minimum. That is normal. That is what we expect to see in a healthy ecosystem. So what we can see here is where we have stable deer populations, we also have fairly stable wolf populations. So the whole claim that wolves are just killing all the deer and elk is complete bullshit that is being pushed primarily from these hunting industries that make a lot of money selling more licenses and that whole industry around that. Because if you have the stable population, you have to decrease the number of tags you're allowed to sell to help keep that population stable. again, I don't know all the ins and outs specifically of that, but it does have to do with ensuring that you're not removing too many members of the population with the tags that are allowed to be collected. So let's move on to the second claim, decimation of livestock. Again, please see that first video where I did talk in depth about research that shows that wolves prefer wild prey over domesticated livestock. But I understand that some people are never going to believe that. So let's actually look at the case study instead. So this case study is titled Learning to Live with Wolves, Community-Based Conservation in the Blackfoot Valley of Montana. This is in Montana. So Senator Brown, listen up. So this particular case study was published, I believe, in 2017. But I may be incorrect on that. Either way, it's fairly recent. Every time I look for academic sources for these videos, I usually restrict within 5 years. So let's kind of get into what this case study showed, what it did, what happened here. And if you guys want me to go more in depth on this case study, because it's actually very interesting, I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. I have put a link to it down below, and it is open access, so anybody can go read it. What the researchers here did, and they came from the University of Montana, the Montana Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and as well as the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. So those three agencies and the university, they partnered together to work with this community in Montana. And they used some already known methods of coexistence with grizzly bears in the area as a guide to come up with non-lethal ways to coexist with gray wolves in this valley in Montana. And one of the big important things, or at least one thing that I think was important that they did, was that they used a local person to help them work with the community and work with the ranchers in the area. And the reason I think that was so important is because these rural communities tend to mistrust outsiders. These small towns tend to be very tight-knit, know each other, and don't necessarily assume that people from outside always have good intentions. So, with the help of their local liaison, they phased out attractants such as boneyards and carcass dumping locations that would already be known to attract predators like grizzly bears, but as well as wolves. Because even though wolves are known to be these very active hunters, they're not going to give up an easy meal. And if you have a bunch of carcasses and things laying near your livestock, or in an area where they'll easily notice your livestock, it's going to attract them to places you don't want them to be. And so instead of having these like boneyards and convenient carcass dumping locations, they replaced them with a regular safe carcass removal to completely remove any dead livestock. And then they also had the ranchers implement the system of protecting their livestock using fladry fencing, specifically around birthing and grazing areas where the livestock would be most vulnerable. And what this particular kind of fencing is basically an electrified wire with kind of flags attached to it. There's a photo of it being installed in the case study that I do have linked. And the purpose here is it scares wolves. It kind of gets into their little wolfy brain. They don't like it. They're going to stay away from those flapping flags and things. It's not natural, and they're not going to trust it. Wolves are by nature cautious and secretive. They don't want to be near things that they don't know if it can hurt them or not. And then if they do get over that fear of the flags, the goal is for that wire to be low enough that it will administer a small shock to any animals that get too close to it. And so, after they were installing things like this and implementing systems to reduce the amount of predators even attracted to the areas where the livestock were, they crunched some numbers and they found that the average confirmed confirmed livestock deaths at the paws of wolves were only about 2.2. So we could round that up to 3. So on average, 3 livestock animals were killed by wolves. And then on average, only about 3 wolves had to be removed as a result of that. And generally, when we say removed here, we do mean euthanized. So here's the graph that they did publish in the case study showing that. So as you'll notice here, that top line is that estimated minimum number of wolves over the time that this whole thing kind of took place and the whole time that they were crunching data for. So you'll notice that minimum population of wolves kind of hung out below 10 right at first at 2007, and then shot up to about 60-ish and seems to be hanging out around 50 towards the end of this case study. And that number of confirmed livestock losses to wolves stays down at almost 0 for every single one of those years, as well as the line that shows the number of wolves removed for those management purposes because of those livestock lost. For the most part, that's why you're gonna remove wolves. So this is just kind of a visual that illustrates that point, that even though the wolf population rose, the number of livestock lost. So confirmed. Because I know there's a lot of instances where killed livestock are found and it's just immediately blamed on wolves. But the confirmation and the way that confirmation can be done is, 1, saw it happen, or 2, biologists will know how to go out and determine if that was a wolf kill or not. And in some cases, it's not necessarily a wolf kill. A wolf could have just fed on something that died from another reason, but that's kind of not the point. So the big takeaway here is that the wolf population rose, but the livestock death did not. So the other big takeaway here is that there were solutions for coexistence that were non-lethal, and there's absolutely no reason they can't be implemented elsewhere. But again, solutions for coexistence are not a one-size-fits-all thing. But again, to reiterate, there are non-lethal options that did work, that have been shown to work, and there's no reason non-lethal options cannot be implemented elsewhere. So to kind of conclude and wrap up everything here, wolves are not these canine monsters that are decimating deer and livestock populations everywhere. They're an important keystone species that is struggling to reestablish stable populations within the contiguous United States. Is it inherently a bad thing that states are in charge of their management? No, not necessarily. That's how it was even when they were on the federal list of endangered and threatened species. It's just that they had to go through the federal Fish and Wildlife Service before they did anything. However, they still should have that federal protection to ensure the continuation and success of the restoration and conservation efforts for the gray wolf in the contiguous United States, as well as the ecosystems that they are bringing back into balance as they are allowed to exist there and reestablish healthy populations. So, while globally Canis lupus may not be an endangered species, in the contiguous United States, they are still struggling to survive, and the updates we are seeing here are a little concerning because they're coming from legislators with a interest in getting rid of wolves entirely and calling it management. So for now, that's all I really have on this entire wolf update situation, but remember to hit subscribe if you would like to see more updates when they come available, or if you just want to hang out and hear more about my science, ecology, conservation, and outdoorsy videos as they come up. And I will see you all in the next one.
Thank you again for watching this video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and ring that bell if you would like to see more. And if you'd like to follow me on any of my other social medias, the links are down in the description below. Don't forget to check out thereptilegoth.com for all of my articles and blog posts. If you found any value in this video and you would like to help support the channel, please check out my Patreon page. That link is also in the description down below. And a special thanks goes out to my Diamond Dragon patron, Diane V. What you're doing is really helping me fund a dream here. I will see you guys all in the next one.